hit you, tell them they don't.
The video shows a Cobb County, Georgia police officer talking to a woman in a car he pulled over on a traffic stop. She's unwilling to move her hands, afraid, she says, of getting shot, and he tells her, don't worry.
But you're not black. Remember, we only kill black people. Yeah, we only kill black people, right?
Hello. In the wake of the persistent murders of black youths by law enforcement agents in the US and a few other places, most of us who are Africans and Africans in the diaspora are once again confronted by the uncomfortable topic: how and when should we talk to children about race and racism? Should we even talk to children about this topic? I know that our first instinct is to shield our children from it. As parents, it's natural for us to want to shield and protect our offspring from unpleasantness, and very few topics are more difficult to confront than race. Unfortunately, the world is the way it is. It is really difficult to talk about racism, and yes, even messy, particularly because nobody wants to raise children with the fear of other human beings. On the one hand, we're being forced to prepare our children for a world which is determined to belittle them, while on the other hand, we do not want to raise children who see race as the only determining factor in the way they interact with other people. We definitely do not want to raise children who, due to the oppressive systems in the world, turn out to be racists. So just how do we find a balance? Since the reality is that parents of black children and children of mixed races do not have the luxury of choosing whether or not to talk to their children about race. We owe our children the responsibility of preparing them for the oppressive system which has persisted. It is usually not a choice for black parents to make, but a necessity to educate our children about this blot on humanity which refuses to go away, irrespective of how advanced we like to think the world has become. Tragically, while the urgency seems more pressing for Africans and Africans in the diaspora, the way the world is structured is such that even for those on the African continent, there is also the need to be aware of the effects of race on the way the world is structured. So in this episode, I would like to focus on how to talk to children about race and racism. First off, the social and educational development of children will make discussions about racism complicated, because what is addressed can be influenced by different factors such as family structure, socioeconomic status, or the environment in which we reside. I must confess that in researching this topic, I found that when discussing race and racism with children, there is no such thing as foolproof advice. However, there are a few things to bear in mind, although each parent will determine what makes the most sense for them and their family. Come to think of it, going by the way things have been progressing, especially since the Trump administration has opened the gates wider for formerly closeted racists, white parents who are themselves not racist owe their children a responsibility of talking to them about race and its complications. So, how do children learn racial bias? Well, they learn about racism and racial differences and racial bias from a very early age, and they learn it from their first teachers, us, their parents. We're the ones who model to them how to deal with and react to racial differences. The process of learning racial bias or tolerance is similar to the way children learn language. Without making any effort to deliberately teach them, children assimilate our attitude to race in much the same manner as they comprehend the primary language spoken around them. Much as most of us might want to think that children are colorblind, it is safe to say that they lose that color blindness very early in life, because children have the ability to internalize racial biases from their parents, carers, and other people with whom they interact as early as age 2. By the time they're in their early teens, most children already have set beliefs about race. So we owe our children a responsibility to help shape their outlook on race in a positive way. Unless you're an avowed racist, you must believe that all humans are the same. However, race is also a normal aspect of life. It's no use denying that there are racial differences. The world is made up of people of different hues and various physical attributes. Acknowledging differences should be turned into a way of honoring differences. It is better that we point out the difference to our children in a way which honors the humanity of all races, rather than leave them to find out from outsiders who want to capitalize on differences. So let's talk to our children about differences, but emphasize the quality of those differences from a very early age. Talking about race should be a normal part of life in all families. Having said that, I also have to admit that in most parts of the world right now, white families can decide not to have these necessary conversations with their children. However, this is wrong. It is an extremely necessary topic for all parents of black children and children of mixed races. It cannot be ignored. By talking to our children about it, we're taking charge of the direction of the narrative. Sadly, it's true that some black parents don't want to think about racism because they don't want to teach their children about inequalities. They maintain that children should see themselves the same as all other children. While there is nothing inherently wrong with this motive, it can also be a way of setting children up for harm. So as parents, we owe our children a responsibility of preparing them to be mindful of the environment in which they are raised. We must speak up about racial disparities and how people are often treated differently based on racial differences. We must educate children to be self-conscious, smart, and protected. We should draw on history to explain why the world is the way it is. We can also look to culture for people who have stood up for equality and justice. Let's teach our children to take pride in battles that have been fought and won, but let them know that the war is still ongoing. As parents, we need to help our children navigate their curiosity. We need to be sensitive to our children's needs. Most children are curious about the environment and its people, they generally look to their parents for explanations. This is a good reason why we need to educate ourselves in readiness to answer questions that our children might have. And you do not necessarily fail your children if you do not immediately have the answers to the questions they raise. It's okay to admit to your children that you do not know the answer immediately, and or I'm not sure, but we do owe them the responsibility of letting them know that we will find out, or we could even challenge them to join us in finding out answers to questions they might be curious about with regards to race and racism. So as parents, our role is not just to teach our children our values and how to accept everything that we believe in. It's important to also teach them that when unsure, they need to equip themselves with the right information. So, as a parent, if you don't know what to say immediately, it's okay to get back to the question. When children ask questions, their thoughts and expectations are all worth addressing. As parents, we should make the time to understand why the question is posed and help our children to navigate their curiosity. I know that one of the big things behind any parent's mind would be, so how do you make something as major as race relatable to a child? Race and racism, no matter who you are difficult to explain to children. But it's all right as parents to be wary of the fact that the concept of racism may be damaging or terrifying, especially if the child is likely to be an object of racism. The fear could also stem from the fact that as a parent, you might have experienced racism yourself. It is, however, necessary to use that fear by turning it into strength. Rather than shy away from it, let's confront it and use it to motivate our children. To remain silent out of fear of racism is to concede power, which can harm our children, who will be left vulnerable to it if we allow the fear of racism to keep us from empowering the next generation. The very last thing we want to teach our children is the idea that things are okay the way they are. By failing to talk to them about race and racism, our silence is telling them that the world is all right the way it is, and that there is nothing we can do about it. In other words, our silence is acquiescence. When it comes to issues about race and racism, just as any other forms of oppression, as parents, we cannot afford to be silent bystanders. No matter your race, silence is no longer an option. Arm yourself and your children with examples of people who have stood up in the face of inequality and people who have worked and continue to work for positive change. Let your children know from a very early age that you and they can be part of making the world a better place by embracing and honoring racial difference. That way, we are showing our children that racism is not inevitable. It is possible to tackle it, and they too can be a part of the solution. It is equally important to show children by example. We can do this through the way we relate to other people of different races and ethnic groups. What they look or sound like or where they come from should not be a determining factor in the way we interact with people. We need to model this to our children very early in life. We need to let them see us as members of whatever community we find ourselves in. We need to let them see that we respect others. We need to show respect in a manner that everybody can embrace, expect, and demand the same respect from people in our community. Be an advocate for change through your interactions with others. Look around you. As a parent, you cannot be uninvolved. In conclusion, it is really important for Black parents to instill in their children that humanity must come first. What I'm suggesting here is that as parents, we need to be active advocates against racism. We must act against racism by speaking up against it, because we want our children to hear us condemn it in whatever way, shape, or form from a very early age. We need to empower our children to recognize it as a disease very early in life, a societal disease which they have a responsibility to watch out for and resist. Thank you. See you next time.